Okay, now we get into Daniel chapter 11. I've said before, and I mentioned this, I've kind of hinted at this earlier in today's videos, that Daniel 11 is the one place more than any other spot in Scripture where we get like this prophetic statement of the future. We've had that already a couple times in the book of Daniel. We saw in the vision of Daniel of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2, and Daniel's own dream in Daniel 7, and Daniel 8, and God's mission statement, and the circumstances and time in which that occurs in Daniel 9. But here in Daniel chapter 11, we're going to have a series of prophecies detailing history in advance in pretty specific detail. We're going to be covering a little bit of the Persian Empire. We're going to cover that basically in a paragraph. And then we're going to be covering the history of the Grecian Empire as it pertains to Israel, down to the days basically until they regain their independence, which they have for about 100 years before the Romans come. And that is going to cover the period of time from a little bit of Persia, and then the period of Greece starts with Alexander the Great in the 330s BC, and goes all the way down to the days of Antiochus, a ruler named Antiochus IV Ephiphanes in the 160s BC. So about 170 years of history that we're going to cover here in this 11th chapter of Daniel, about 35 verses or so. And we're going to be flying through it pretty quickly, and we're going to be covering it in pretty specific detail. This, of course, causes the smart people to have lots of problems because they think this is impossible. So they try to say this is all written after these things happen, and someone is writing history and presenting it as prophecy. We've already gone into detail before in the book of Daniel about how that doesn't have to be that. There are strong evidences and strong reasons to believe this book was written in the 500s BC when it claims to be. And the primary reason for believing it was written afterwards is that you just don't want to believe it was written beforehand. I mean, you simply just don't want to. I mean, in the end, there's no actual reason other than, every reason you could offer as to why the book must have been written after 150 BC or whatever can be refuted or nullified very simply, except for just your own desire just to believe that it had to have been written afterwards. And that's up to you, okay? Like I said before, the book actually goes all the way down to the days of the Roman Emperor Domitian, which is in the late 1st century AD. So, and we know that Daniel existed by 100 BC or so because we have copies or fragments of copies that go back to that time or earlier. So it's like it had to have been written at least 200 years before Domitian, and it goes in its time frame goes all the way down to Domitian, and it covers the fall of the temple and the second fall of the temple at the hands of the Romans in the city. And that it was all after we know Daniel was finished. So like even if you cling to a 150 or so date for authorship for Daniel, even that is not enough to actually get you to the end of Daniel's predicted prophecies. You're still going to fall short by 200 years. So in the end, like if the primary reason to believe that Daniel was written in 150 BC or so is something that you just want to believe that. You've chosen to believe that because you don't want to believe otherwise. Now, this section is long and complicated, all right? And it won't make any sense unless you know what it's actually talking about. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of commentary on the history that's described here. Again, we're going to be covering the history of the Persians in about a paragraph or so, down to the time of Xerxes, who is a Persian king that we'll read about in Esther. And then we're going to skip from there to Alexander the Great. Alexander, of course, the Grecian conqueror. And he comes along about 150 years after Xerxes, in the 330s BC, and then we're going to go from him down to Antiochus Epiphanes, ruler of Syria, north of Israel, in the 160s BC, and we're going to be kind of covering this 170 or so years worth of history in about 30 verses. And we can, and there is a lot of history here, and one of the reasons why it took me so long to get through the book of Daniel is because I was reading about some of this history and trying to figure out how I was going to present this. Because, we could get lost in this for weeks and months if we wanted to. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this history. I will give names, okay? This section is not going to give anybody any specific name. I have written here in my handwritten list of notes a bunch of names that these titles that we mentioned here in this chapter refer to. So I will cover that. This information is easily available, as I said way back at the beginning of my video project, and I've been consistent about this ever since. I have access to nothing that anybody listening to this video does not have access to. I have access to the internet, and I have a library card, okay? Like, those are the two things that I use to do my study and my research. And I believe that anybody who is capable of watching or listening to these videos has access to those two things too, okay? If you are capable of watching this video or listening to it in some way or another, however I end up distributing these, then I believe you are capable of having access to the internet and access to a library card. And those are the two things that I use. So this information is available, okay? I don't even have a very thorough grasp of knowledge of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff I have in my bedroom right now, these thick volumes I took out from the library that cover this period of time, which I've barely even begun to scratch. Okay, so there is a lot of stuff out there about this period of time that you can find pretty easily if you want to. And if you are someone who has access to this video, however it happened, then I believe you have access. I'm going to assume that you have access to the internet and access to a library card, so you can do this research yourself. It is beyond the scope of these videos for me to go into a lot of detail about this. This video series is not a video series about the history of the Persians or the history of the Greeks or the history of the Romans. So it is beyond the scope of this video series for me to get into that in too much depth, but I will give the names of these people as we read about them, because this section itself is not going to give any names. It's going to give titles. And so I will read the names of these titles that these titles refer to. So here we go. Daniel chapter 11, starting in verse 2. Now then, I tell you the truth. That sounds like a Jesus quote, huh? I tell you the truth. He said that a lot. 3 more kings will appear in Persia. There will actually be more than 3 kings, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. So it's actually going to be far more than just 4. Okay, so these 3 kings are, okay, so remember, Daniel, this is the 3rd year of King Cyrus, which is the first full king of Persia. We had Darius the Mede, Daniel 6, he's gone. Now we have Cyrus the Persian. There's going to be 4 more after him. The first one's going to be his son, Cambyses. Cyrus himself didn't have a particularly long reign. He's going to die in 530 BC. Under somewhat suspicious circumstances. I think we don't really know for certain how Cyrus died. That's only a few years from now. This is about 536 BC, so Cyrus is going to die in about 6 years. And then a guy named Cambyses, his son, is going to... By the way, another thing I should mention, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these names right. Okay? I don't know. These names are ancient Hebrew, Greek, transliterated, Hebrew, Persian, Greek. I don't know. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce these names. Cyrus' son, Cambyses, is going to take over after his father dies in a few years, at this point in time. And he's going to reign from 530 to 522 BC. And upon his death, he's going to go fight Egypt. He's going to fight Egypt and conquer Egypt in 525 BC. That's pretty much going to be the end of Egypt as an independent nation. He's going to have a brother who he either kills or survives, and someone's going to come along and pretend, either is that brother or pretends to be that brother, and there's going to be a civil war because Cambyses' brother, or maybe make-believe brother, is going to try to take over the kingdom in 522 BC. And Cambyses is going to commit suicide and die, and this other guy, pseudo-whatever, I can't even pronounce this, or Gamutra, I don't know. We don't know whether or not this was really Cambyses' brother, or he just claimed to be, but he's going to die. He's going to be overthrown by a guy who's going to call himself Darius I. Now, remember, Darius, we already had Darius. We've had Darius the Mede. And that guy is gone. The name Darius is some kind of a throne name, and so this other guy, who was a general or a soldier in the army, is going to kill the brother, the imposter brother, whatever, and become king. He's going to take the throne named Darius, probably after the previous Darius the Mede. And this is going to be the first Darius. There's going to be three of these guys. There's going to be three guys called Darius from this point on. He's going to be the first. And we're going to call him Darius I Testosthenes or something like that. He's going to reign from 522 to 486 BC. We don't know his original name. Darius I took that name as his throne name, and whatever his original name was has been lost to history. That's the third king. So we go from Cyrus, who's not one of these kings, to Cambyses' son, to the fake brother, or maybe the real brother, who knows, and then Darius I. He stabilizes the empire after a period of internal strife over who's the rightful king. And then after him, there's a guy named Xerxes. And he's going to be, first of all, he's the guy in charge during the book of Esther. When we read the book of Esther, he's going to be the guy in charge then. And he's going to reign from 486 to 465 BC. Now, Darius I and Xerxes are both going to initiate battles against the Greeks. And they're going to continue that on for a long period of time. So those are the four kings that we're talking about. Cambyses, his successor slash brother slash fake brother, Gamustra, whatever his name is, or pseudo, whatever, I can't even read my handwriting here. Darius I, who kills the imposter and takes over the throne, stabilizes the kingdom. That's in 522 BC. And then Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, how you pronounce it. Same name, same guy. In 486 to 465 BC. And he will be in charge in the time of Esther. He's the fourth of these kings that we're talking about here. So, three more kings will appear in Persia, and then a fourth, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by him, we'll see an example of his riches and wealth in the book of Esther, when he throws these magnificent feasts. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Persia and Greece came into contact with each other way back in the days of Cyrus. Before Cyrus went down into Babylon and conquered Babylon, he had gone up initially into Lydia and Asia Minor and conquered that area, and in the process of doing so, he encountered some of the Greek city-states that were located there. And so that is what brought Persia and Greece into conflict with each other. And they're basically going to be in conflict with each other for the next couple of hundred years. Alexander the Great, when he comes along in the 330s BC, is going to want to finish this fight with the Persians once and for all, which he does. And his justification for it is that the Persians have been bothering them for 200 years. So the Persians and the Greeks have been fighting each other since basically the days of Cyrus. It will come and go. It will not be constant 200 years of continual warfare. Neither side ever really gets the upper hand until Alexander comes and destroys the Persian Empire. They're going to fight each other, but basically to a stalemate for 200 years. They will have peace treaties that come and go during that time. It's not going to be until Alexander the Great comes and destroys Persia that we really have a decisive winner. Each side will get its victories here and there, but neither side is really going to be able to dominate the other until Alexander the Great. Then a mighty king will appear. This is Alexander the Great. Now, Xerxes, the last king we're talking about here in Persia, reigned from 486 to 465 BC. Alexander the Great begins his conquest in, I think, 330 BC or 333 BC. That's about 130 years after Xerxes. Okay, so we're skipping 130 years of time here. In fact, the Old Testament itself will go down into the reign of the guy after Xerxes, Artaxerxes, who is in charge in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra in the 450s and following BC. So we're even skipping that guy. So we're skipping a lot of the Persian kings here. I think the reason why we're doing this is because the point of this section is to talk about Greece. Persia is just a prelude. We're not really going to be spending any time talking about Persia. And I think the point of contact here is between Xerxes and his wars against Greece. So we're using that as a bridge to get away from talking about Persia to talking about Greece, because the rest of this is all going to be about Greece until we get down to the Romans at the very end. So I just think that's what's going on here. We're using this king, Xerxes, who ends up taking the fight to Greece in 480 BC when he goes to fight against them. We're going to use that as a jumping off point to start talking about Greece, and we're just going to skip ahead 150 years until we get down to Greece. Again, that happens. The Bible does do that. And this is a prophecy of things that haven't happened yet. And even when the Bible records information that has already happened, again, the classic example I always go to is the death of Sennacherib in Isaiah, when it talks about him surrounding the city of Jerusalem, and then his army is defeated, and he goes back to Nineveh empty-handed, and then he gets assassinated. The text makes it sound like it happened immediately, but it didn't. It happened like 20 years later. So the Bible can do this. It often does. It does make these long skips in time. And here is a prophecy, so we're speaking about things that haven't even happened yet at this point. So, Persia will stir up against Greece, and then a mighty king will appear, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the four winds of heaven. Now we know who this is, because we've already had a vision describing that in Daniel 8. When we saw a vision of the ram and the goat, and the two-horned ram was the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the four-winged, hang on, oh boy, Daniel 8, the goat had a prominent horn, which got broken off at the height of its power, and four other horns grew up, and then a little horn came up out of that. So we know this is that guy. We've already talked about this, and now we're going to get more detail about that. We're going to be talking about these horns that grow up out of the Grecian Empire, which appear after its initial long, prominent horn gets broken off. So that's what we're talking. That's the kind. Again, let Daniel interpret itself. We're setting this section here in the context of what we've already revealed in Daniel 8. So after he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the four winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants. His wife and his sons are going to be killed. Nor will it have the power he exercised, because it's going to be split into four, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. After Alexander died, Alexander goes all the way into India, and then his army finally convinces him to turn around and go back. And he's on his way back when he gets sick, and I think he has a bout of drunkenness and dies in Babylon. And that's in 323 BC. His wife and child eventually get murdered, and his kingdom does not go to any of his posterity, but instead to his generals. And eventually it settles out to these four divisions. A guy named Cassander, who gets the territories of Macedonia and Greece itself. A guy called Lysimachus, who gets Thrace and Asia Thrace, or how you pronounce it, in Asia Minor. And we're not really going to worry about them. Okay, there's four parts of this empire, and we're not really going to worry about those two. The actual Grecian area, Greece itself, and that area, we're not going to really worry about that. What we're focused on are these next two. The Seleucus, I don't know how you pronounce this. So I say Seleucus because it's just easier for me to say, but I'm not sure if that's the proper pronunciation or not. The Seleucus Empire, which is based in Antioch in Syria, which is north of Israel, and the Ptolemy, his general Ptolemy, will to control Egypt, which is south of Israel. Those are the two main branches of the Grecian Empire that we're going to focus on here in Daniel 11 and throughout the rest of the Bible. The farther west branches of the Grecian Empire, they're going to be kind of left to their own devices. Eventually the Romans will take those over, and the Romans will eventually come and take over these two empires too. So those are the four branches. You have four Greek generals who, after fighting each other for a period of years, it shakes out to these four divisions of the empire. Seleucus, in fact, is actually going to be a general of Ptolemy, and he is going to end up becoming the king of the northern part of the kingdom. So throughout the rest of this section, we're going to have two kings we're going to be talking about, or two titles, I should say. We have the king of the south and the king of the north. The king of the south refers to the king of Egypt, and that is going to be the dynasty of the Ptolemies. They're all going to be called Ptolemy. And they're going to go all the way, that's going to go all the way down to Cleopatra, who is actually Cleopatra the Seventh, although we usually don't call her that. And she's the one who is there when Egypt falls to, she and Mark Antony have their affair, and then they lose the battle with Rome, and Rome takes over Egypt. Cleopatra and Mark Antony kill themselves, or die. Mark Antony kills himself, and Cleopatra then kills herself, and so rather than being taken captive back to Rome, and then Rome conquers Egypt. And that's in 27 BC, or 30. Actually, the battle itself is in 31 BC. And that's the end of the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, and that's when Rome takes over the entire world. So the Ptolemies are going to go all the way from the fall of Alexander the Great himself and his general, Ptolemy I, all the way down to Cleopatra, who is not, by the way, the first Cleopatra. I think she's the seventh. And then the king of the north is going to be the king of Syria. And Syria is north of Israel. And the king of the north is going to have control over Israel for the first part of this time. Hang on a second. Let me change position here. My leg is getting sore. So in this section, we have two titles that keep getting brought up. The king of the north. The king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the north is the king of Syria, and that, by the way, is going to end up being a guy called Seleucus. I mentioned him earlier, and he will found the Seleucid Empire. I have a hard time pronouncing that word. And they're going to be known mainly. There's going to be two major throne names that those guys take. There's going to be the Seleucuses, Seleucus 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there's going to be the Antiochuses, Antiochus 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Ptolemies are always going to be Ptolemy. There's going to be like 9 of them, or I think actually even more than that, but I think there's like 13 of them total. Even Cleopatra's brother was named like Ptolemy the 13 or something like that. So the Ptolemies are all Ptolemies, but the kings of the north are going to take different titles, either Seleucus or Antiochus. And the king of the north is going to have control over Israel for the first part of this period of time. So the struggle here communicated in chapter 11 is largely going to be about Israel trying to wrest control of itself back away from the hands of the king of the north. The reason why this matters to Israel is because Syria is north of Israel, and Egypt is south of Israel. And when they went to go fight each other, they used Israel as a bridge to do that. So this is going to directly impact the people living in Israel during this time. Okay, so, actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and start a new video. This next section I'm going to be reading through, and I'm going to be filling in the names according to who these people actually were in history, instead of just saying the king of the north, the king of the south. Let's go ahead and start a new video for that.